Vaishali Pradhan from the British Council. The topic for today is teaching productive skills in remote settings. If you have any questions during the session, please write them in the chat box and someone from our team will get back to you. Please do continue to keep your videos and microphones off during the entire session. We've got a lot of participants, over 150 people, and we might be expecting more. So we really need to save the bandwidth so that the presentations and audio is visible and it's audible for everyone. I'd like to welcome our speakers for today. Iftakhar Jamil is a Cambridge CELTA and Delta teacher trainer and is a practicing teacher who works for International House London. We've known him for a very long time and we'd like to refer to him as Iffy. With over 18 years of teaching and training experience in countries like Japan, South Korea, Colombia, and of course Nepal, he regularly runs CELTA and Delta courses and creates bespoke courses for CLIL and current trends in ELT. He also has experience of running teacher training courses for primary and secondary school teachers and has taught general and exam English at all levels, age groups, and in a variety of contexts. Our second speaker, Prem Prasad Paudel, is currently a PhD scholar at the Education University of Hong Kong. He has worked as a lecturer of English education at Mahendra Ratna Campus, Tribhuvan University, for more than a decade. He is well established as a teacher educator and material writer in the field of ELT in Nepal. He has also worked freelance with some international organizations like Save the Children, UNESCO, CARE, and the British Council. He has a wide range of teaching experiences from school level to university level in Nepal and Hong Kong as well. It's a pleasure to have you both presenting today. Over to you, Prem, to get started.
Thank you very much, Vaishali ji, for your very nice introduction. I would like to welcome you all guests and my friend Jamil in this presentation. Today we are going to, in this seminar, we are going to talk about teaching productive skills remotely, right? And basically focusing on speaking. Before we go into the content, let me present some of the housekeeping rules about the webinar. This webinar will be recorded and the link will be sent to you by email tomorrow. And the British Council Nepal's website and NELTA website will be posting this video later. And you will receive an email tomorrow with a link to your certificate. You can type your name in space and download and print it. We also provide you the evaluation and need analysis form. You will also receive an email tomorrow with a link to an evaluation and needs analysis form. Your feedback will be highly appreciated. There are some housekeeping rules during this webinar session today. So if you are not the speaker, please keep yourself on mute. It is also recommended that you switch off your video during the presentations. Use the chat box in case you have any questions for the presenters, and we will be responding to you to the level we have the time availability. And use the raise hand button in case you have something important to say. Thank you again and welcome to this session. In today's session, the webinar, you will be familiar with teaching productive skills face-to-face and teaching them remotely, right? And this is the time that we have to understand this, how the productive skills can be taught through the remote and online mode. At the same time, you will also understand some useful and practical skills in teaching productive skills applicable in both the physical classroom and in the remote setting. So these are the objectives of the seminar. These are the overall objectives of the seminar, and there are some other details you will see during the presentation. I would like to start with this webinar. We have divided this webinar into two sections. In the first part of the webinar, I'll be talking about the what aspect of the productive skills. And in the second section of the seminar, my colleague Jamil will be talking about what are the practical skills, how of these productive skills, right? How we, let's say, teach the productive skills in the classroom. So there will be some hands-on techniques that how we can implement our language teaching expertise in our classroom to better facilitate our students to learn the productive skills. So let me begin with what productive skills actually are. As in the previous webinar, I think you have listened to what receptive skills are, right? Among the 4 different language skills, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, the listening and reading, these 2 skills of language are receptive skills. So the other 2 skills, which are speaking and writing, these 2 skills are the productive skills in language learning, right? And these 2 skills, the speaking and the writing, along with the receptive skills like listening and reading, are the very important skills for language learning. And these, especially the productive skills, are further important in the sense that they require students to produce a piece of language for communication. As you know that the primary goal of language learning is to enable our students to communicate the message that they have, or to facilitate, to enable them to say what they really want to say, or to, in a sense, that to develop their communicative competence, right? So after the learning of the language, and with the productive skills, our students will be able to come up with a piece of language which is used for the communication, and there is a particular purpose for this communication, right? So if our students do not produce any form in audio and visual forms, then we would not be able to know what they really have learned and what they have in their minds, because it is through the production, right? It is through what do they produce out, we can understand what they have learned. So we can understand their communicative ability, we can understand their communicative competence, we can understand their linguistic capability only when they come up with some output, which is what we say production, right? So our primary goal in teaching language is to enable our students to come up with a form that is that is meaningful and that is coming out purposefully. That's why the focus on these productive skills is necessary, okay? Similarly, these skills are quite complicated and they are quite complex as well, in the sense that they are influenced by a number of variables, such as the participant relationships, like who you are talking to. That's one of the important things that students need to know when they are trying to develop their productive skills, right? So when we speak, for example, if the students are speaking with a teacher in the classroom, and if the student is speaking with somebody outsider and a stranger outside the classroom, the way they select the language forms, the way they select the language structures will be different. That's why there's a kind of relationship among participants when they are trying to produce the linguistic items, right? Similarly, there are a lot of sociocultural factors like their own cultural patterns and like family habits and all these things, their age and their level of motivation and their personality traits. All these different factors are trying to shape how they are producing the linguistic item, right? The piece for communication. This is why these these productive skills are quite complicated and also quite complex. So in this webinar, as I said before, that covering both the skills will be quite longer. That's why we are trying to go into depth with speaking, and my colleague Jamil, he will connect how the speaking activities, the speaking techniques typically used in speaking can be linked to writing, so that we can cover tentatively both. I mean, more on speaking and something on writing, right? So in language learning and language teaching, teaching, speaking, and writing through the face-to-face mode and through the teaching of these skills remotely are different because we are in the different context, right? Face-to-face context is a classroom context where you come up with the connection, come in connection with people around you and in a physical space. But when you are teaching the same skills online or in a remote modality, then such as physical context cannot be found. In that sense, these two skills, these two modes are different while teaching productive skills like speaking and writing. Okay, though we usually need somebody to talk to or somebody to read our written piece, it does not mean that we cannot teach those skills in an online mode. That means we can teach these two skills as effectively as possible through the online mode also. But we need to consider some of the constraints that are related to how we handle the classroom teaching and learning environment, right? So the roles of teachers and students might be slightly different. At the same time, the content, the way that you are assigning the tasks to the students might be different, or the way you are approaching the tasks might be different, but the core value of teaching these productive skills will be the same. That's why, as I said before, that when we teach through the face-to-face mode, right? So we have a kind of different context. And when we teach through online mode, we have a different context. So according to these two different contexts of teaching and learning, we are likely to design different activities, okay, that can better facilitate learners to learn and to be able to produce the language items, okay? So in many, let's say, virtual learning platforms, you can see that I think probably most of you are familiar with this Zoom or Microsoft Teams and other virtual learning platforms. There are various features that can be used for practicing speaking and writing. For example, if you go to the Zoom, you can have breakout rooms and you can assign people, your students, your pupils, to different rooms and give them different tasks. And then they will be engaged into different tasks and you can be the facilitator there. You can enter into the room and so on. At the same time, you can also run some pair work activities when you are teaching online, right? By using the virtual learning platforms. But the thing is, how best you can handle those virtual learning platforms for targeting our learners to produce the linguistic items is very, very important, okay? As I said, that teaching face-to-face is different from teaching remotely, right? So let me tell you how these different modes of teaching are different, okay? This is what a teacher needs to understand, because like sometimes teachers think that remote is quite remote, so they may not be designing good activities and good resources, so that might influence learners, the learning, let's say the right for learning, at the same time the potential of learning, okay? So if you are teaching through face-to-face mode, I think we are familiar with this idea. It is quite easy for us to monitor because you can see who is doing what. Like as a teacher, I can see the half of the classroom and see the many students and also understand what they are doing. And I can see the other half of the classroom or other group, and I can see what people are doing. So I can easily monitor what they are doing. But if I'm teaching through the remote or online mode, then the monitoring factor can be quite uncontrollable. I would not say that it is not controllable. It can be controllable, but the control of the teacher while monitoring, it will be like very much limited, okay? So monitoring is there, but you cannot monitor like the classroom, because in the classroom you can see many people at once, but if you see on the screen, then you have some limited participants, and you have to have the slides and you have to have the students list, so you cannot cover all of them at once, right? So that is one of the problems that we face when we teach remotely. At the same time, there is a high level of teacher control when you are teaching face-to-face. But when you are teaching remotely, you cannot have that high level of control. That creates some problems with student disciplines. Like some students might switch off the video, or some students might switch off this audio and they might be doing something else which you might not be able to notice, right? So this is why there will be some differences in the type and the manner and the level of students discipline when you are teaching remotely. Okay, but when you are teaching face to face through the face to face mode, you can provide a huge amount of hands-on resources. You can distribute them, and you can see who is writing on the papers, worksheets. You can see who is doing what, and you can see what are the writing levels and what are the like intelligibility of the written text and something like that. So there is more chance that you can provide them with the resources, hands in the resources, and you can also monitor accordingly, right? But when you are teaching remotely, there are some of the problems like students' attendance to the talks might be quite low. And at the same time, we have heard some news these days that there is very low level of students' participation in some contexts due to the poor internet connections, right? So that is also creating a kind of divide among the students and in their learning. Okay, and when we are in the face-to-face mode of teaching, we are connected, right? We feel like we're connected with the teacher, we're connected with our friends, so we are totally connected inside the classroom context. But when we are teaching remotely, there is a sense of disconnection, because you can easily disconnect from the people, from their faces. If you switch off, then disconnection, right? So this is how this kind of sensation can be developed when we are dealing through remote mode. Okay, and in the classroom setting, in a face-to-face setting, there's a chance that you can have frequent interaction with your teacher, with your peers, and with a group, right? With the members of the group. But if you are teaching remotely, there is interaction. There is no doubt that there is no interaction. There is interaction, but the interaction will be quite limited. It's limited because of the time and because of the teachers' way of handling the interaction process and so on, right? At the same time, I would also say that when we are teaching through face-to-face mode, we can have these classrooms which are very much linguistically rich, like we have songs, rhymes, poems, and there's a chance that our peers can chat with each other in an open way, right? But when you are shifting to the remote mode of teaching or online mode of teaching, the linguistic exposure will be limited. The linguistically, the situation will be quite limited, right? And there will be more teacher domination. There are some complaints that when people are teaching online, the teacher domination is the highest level, right? And the limitation is there in student interaction, and also the time factor, because it requires a longer time for preparation. So this is what in this slide, what I wanted to focus is, as a teacher, we need to understand the difference between the way and the problems and the settings that we are likely to face in the face-to-face mode, and at the same time at the remote mode. So that if we are aware of these conditions in the remote mode, we can better facilitate our students for better learning, right? And they can be equipped with some linguistic input. Okay. So still there are some challenges in teaching productive skills. As I said, that was about how remote and the face-to-face teaching are different. Now let me tell you how teachers are facing some challenges in teaching online while teaching productive skills, right? The first one is there is unequal and uneven student participation. What we can see is sometimes the students are not feeling like they are speaking, right? Students are not feeling like they're writing. Okay, they do not feel like they're writing because they don't feel their teachers in front of them, they don't feel their friends in front of them, so they try to avoid this. Okay, so that is sometimes creating a kind of different uneven participation. And at the same time, if you see, I think you have experienced this scenario that some students feel like speaking all the time, right? Some like raising hands all the time and making comments all the time. So there are some students who want to take part in the speaking activity or the writing activities all the time. So you might be seeing that the students are, there's a huge gap in the participation of our students when we are teaching online, right? At the same time, even if they are participating, some students do not feel like they need to speak, they need to participate, right? They hesitate to speak, and they do not want to, let's say, go to the group, and they don't want to share what they have. That can be one of the challenges in teaching, right? And some students hesitate, and they are with the fear of making mistakes. So with this fear, it is likely that they will not be able to participate and engage in the tasks that the teacher has provided to them, and that is likely to create a kind of gap in learning. Okay. At the same time, there will be a one directional flow of information dominating the pedagogy, right? Once there is a domination in the domination of the one directional flow of information, it is likely that that may hamper the learning of the productive skills. Okay. Similarly, you have seen in the case of Nepal, I think these are the common concerns in the case of Nepal, that some teachers are unprepared, and some teachers are likely to neglect some of the language skills like speaking and writing. Okay, so many teachers emphasize writing over speaking. If you see the English curriculum, and if you see the classroom patterns of some of the students, some of the teachers, and they will be focusing on writing. They will be giving some written tasks, and they will be avoiding students' potential for learning how to speak, right? So this is what some teachers are unprepared, and even if some teachers are prepared, there's a chance that they are trying to neglect speaking because of various reasons, like that number of reasons that they are likely to avoid speaking, or they're likely to neglect the speaking tasks, right? And in some classrooms, you might have already realized that the noise, like speaking, requires production of the sounds, right? So when the students are engaged in the speaking activities in our classrooms, there is a noise, right? But in some contexts, there are some people, even administrators and some others, they do not really enjoy, they do not welcome the classroom noise. So because of this unwelcome environment, unwelcoming, let's say, feeling towards speaking and towards production, the teaching and learning of productive skills has been paralyzed in many of the contexts, right? Similarly, there are some technical issues, like as I said before, that there's a low level of internet connection in many of the places in Nepal, right? So if you go just the opposite of this hill here, right, you might have very poor connection of the internet. So students' participation will be hampered by that region. Okay. Similarly, our parents may not be in the position to offer technical assistance because parents might not be equipped with those technical skills. Like, for example, if the internet disconnected, and if there are some problems with the slides, if there are some problems with like, sharing and something with the tags, right? Some parents are not able to handle that. Because of that, the teachers currently are facing some challenges in teaching through online. Okay. And one of the major problems that I, as a teacher, have realized in the case of Nepal is that these productive skills, right? While teaching these productive skills, people are not thinking that teaching productive skills require a process, right? The whole production process goes through production. The product comes through a process, right? This is true. But what people think is, they look at the product. They think the product is the only thing. And the product that they produce, the students' pronunciation, for example, the students' writing, for example, that is the only thing that is required in productive skills. But the understanding should be something like the productive skills undergo a long process, right? I'll talk about what the processes are. And if he will also talk about how these different activities go through the process in learning the productive skills, right? So we have to like we have to change this kind of understanding that production is the product is the goal. So it should not be product oriented. We have to be process oriented, because once we involve our students in the process of speaking or a process of writing, then there is a chance that they will come up with a very good product, and that very good product is the instance of their learning, right? So the learning should go through the process and come up with a product. This is what, as teachers, we need to understand. So okay, so this is what I want to focus here. Similarly, like I said before, that this speaking and writing are the primary, speaking and writing are the productive skills, right? And we cannot cover both speaking and writing at one time. So that's why in our session, we're focusing more on speaking. Why? Because speech is the fundamental mode of knowing a language, okay? So it is one of the core elements of communicative competence. So to understand whether our students have the required level of communicative competence or not, we have to see their speaking ability, right? This is one of the core elements. So there are other elements for communicative competence, but speaking is one of them. This is what Cannell and Swan long ago said, and this is still continuing to other, adopted by other authors, right? It is a way of natural communication as well, because in that natural communication, like people will be expressing their meanings, right? People will be expressing their values, people will be expressing their thoughts and feelings and so on. So while making this natural communication, there will be some of the soft skills that I said before, like when students are engaged in a process of learning, right? In a process of learning these productive skills, they will be involved in various soft skills, because they have to undergo through those tasks using various soft skills. For example, if you are teaching speaking to your children, you need to understand that speaking starts from articulating the sounds in isolation, right? So once they articulate the sounds in isolation, then they can put the sounds into connected speech. So if you think that your students can produce sounds, that doesn't mean that they can speak. So speaking requires putting sounds together in a connected speech, right? At the same time, when they are speaking, let's say in a connected speech, they have to manipulate stress. Like this is, let's say English is the stress-bound language. So it requires some stress patterns, right? So when we are teaching speaking, we also need to think about how our students are putting the stress matter into certain places in the connected speech. And beyond that, like not only the isolated sounds, not only the sounds in connected speech, not only the stress, but also the intonation patterns. Because the intonation tells us how different meanings are communicated. For example, if they are producing certain structures with rising intonation or glide up, then the meaning might be different, right? When you are producing the same utterance with glide down or falling intonation, the meaning can be different. That's why, as I said, the primary goal of learning to speak is to communicate the meaning. So to communicate the meaning properly, in an accurate way, and in an appropriate way, it is very, very important that our students should be able to understand, able to put the stress and intonation patterns into the sentences. Okay. So I have brought a kind of an instance that let's say that how speaking has been conceptualized in our schools by our teachers, right? So our teachers have different understanding, different, let's say, perceptions toward teaching and speaking. Okay, let me play a video here. Good morning to everyone. Please listen to the video. Who is listening to me? This is the cognitive level. Hello.
Prem sir, we cannot hear the sound of your video.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah, Prem, so your video wasn't audible.
Not audible?
No.
Oh, I don't know what to do then. Mm, okay, let me read this first then. So this is one of the experience that one of the teachers, Titamaya Chantal, one of the secondary level English teachers in public school in Kathmandu, she shares her experience as a teacher dealing with speaking. Right? What she says is speaking skill is the primary skill. In other words, if there is no speaking, there will be no communication at all, right? And she also says that teaching, speaking, and testing, both of them are neglected in the present scenario, right? In the secondary school level curriculum as well, out of the 100 full marks, only 15% of the marks are allocated for speaking skill. While there are soft exercises provided in the textbook, I feel quite difficult to conduct these activities because whenever I try to involve my students in the activity, in the speaking activities, I often have a kind of fear because while conducting those activities, my students have to produce sounds, and the school administration says that the teacher is not capable enough to control the class as there is a noise. So as I said before, that teachers are trying to understand how to, and trying to teach speaking, but at the same time the structure, overall school structure, the overall understanding, and even the curricular matter, all of them are trying to neglect, right, the speaking skill. Maybe because of that, the speaking, let's say, proficiency of our students is quite limited, okay, quite low in Nepal. And maybe this will be like verified by research. Okay, sorry, I could not play the audio because like there was some problem anyway. That's why let me conclude what the theoretical aspect of this speaking process then, right? So if you are teaching speaking, the first thing you have to understand is that how our students conceptualize the message, because only when they understand something they can produce something, right? So the first thing is that the students need to understand what the type of text it was, what was the topic, what was the purpose of that particular content, and what was the meaning of that. For example, if you show a picture, the students need to make a kind of conceptualization of the message given by the picture, right? And once they get the message, they will be able to formulate the message based on their strategic choices, right? For example, they will be choosing a different set of words, and they will be choosing different level of discourse, like the difficulty level, and they will be choosing different strategic choices, right? They will be making some strategic choices on how to express, okay? Once they conceptualize the message and once they formulate the message, then only they can articulate the message. So this is what the production is. So what I was going to say here is the last stage is the production, articulation of the message, which we can see, but we are not looking at all these two different processes, right? So as a teacher, we should not be looking at the last stage only. We have to look at the first and the second stage, because the first stage helps them to conceptualize, and the second stage helps them to make choices of strategies and the lexicon and the level of discourses and so on. And finally, they will come up with like production of meaningful utterances. Okay, and when they produce the meaningful utterances, it is likely that they will be self-correcting their productions, and they will be sometimes rewinding their utterances. So when you see your students rewinding their utterances, please don't ignore them, because that is the way they are processing and trying to produce the better forms, right? They're trying to create scaffolding. They're trying to create better outcomes out of the learning process. Okay. However, what is very important to notice is you cannot divide those stages. You cannot put those different stages clearly into different boundaries, different bounded forms, right? You cannot put them separately. What happens is in our pedagogical process in the classroom, these different stages can come together. We can see them coming simultaneously, right? So there is no any clear-cut boundary between these three phases. It's not clear, but it is true that the students are likely to undergo through the processes, and this process you can say pre-speaking activity here, and then let's say processing activity, and then let's say production activity. So you can design your talks based on how the message can be conceptualized, how the message can be formed, and how that message can be articulated. Okay, so this is what I want to say here is that when you are teaching the productive skills, don't only look at the production and articulation, but also go back to how they are formulating the messages, the process, and how they are understanding the concept, right? So when we can bring our students through those stages, it is more likely that we'll be successfully facilitating learners to develop their productive skills. Okay, this is how I presented the what aspect of these productive skills. Now, in the second section, you will be hearing to my colleague Ify, who will present on how these productive skills can be practiced in our language classroom. Thank you so much, and over to you, Ify.
Thank you, Prem. So let's have a look in terms of productive skills. And what we're going to do is try to look at the theory that Prem has given and how we can apply that to production. So obviously there are many kind of speaking tasks that students can do in the physical class and on virtual learning platforms. There's a lot of crossover, and so looking at Nepali course books and also in our context here teaching, we can see that these are the common types of speaking tasks that you as a teacher will do with your students in the classroom, and they can both work in the virtual classroom and in the physical classroom. So obviously you've got personalized descriptive tasks, so maybe describing family, friends, an area where you live, places to visit in your country, describing your favorite restaurant, place, person, so forth. Other types of tasks which I think are quite common in a Nepali setting maybe is exploring cultural differences, comparing change over time, things like that. Or role plays, which are common in a lot of speaking tasks between a customer and shop assistant, asking for directions, giving advice or recommendations. Problem solving tasks. These are ways to solve maybe climate change, dealing with health issues, teenage issues, and other things along those lines. You've also got projects, which is a very big one, like designing a guided tour of your city, designing a proposal to improve your city, so forth. But something based in reality that's meaningful, so project work. And obviously dialogues, which are kind of related to role plays in the sense they're simple conversations, but they might be based around talks or debates or things like that. So now that we have all these different types of speaking activities that teachers do in the physical class, but we can also translate very easily these activities to virtual learning platforms like Zoom. And I've been working on teacher training using Zoom for the past few months. Back on track. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so this is an example of a descriptive speaking task from a textbook in Nepal. And I think it's a grade 7 textbook from the Ministry of Education. And as you can see, it's just a task describing personality of friends. So if we look at this task, as it is in the textbook, we might want to think about maybe what's the issue with this speaking task above. And the issue is, like with many coursebook speaking tasks, it isn't really structured or scaffolded. So we need to think about how, as teachers, we can structure and scaffold a speaking lesson. So based on all the different types of speaking tasks that I've just mentioned. And again, this is just one example of a standard speaking task. So how can we structure scaffold speaking in the physical and virtual classroom using conceptualize, formulate, articulate, self-monitor, and repair? Well, so when we think about what the expert speaker goes through, they go through certain processes subconsciously and automatically. However, we can replicate these processes in the classroom. So we can marry theory with practice really, really well. So for example, the expert speaker thinks about what they want to say, so they conceptualize ideas. So this is something we need to help students with as well. And they might think about things related to the topic, ideas and opinions. So the content of what students want to say. And also we think about, the expert speaker thinks about how they're going to say it. So this is kind of like the language, which is called formulation. And the expert speaker makes choices about the lexis they should use in relation to specific speaking tasks, the grammar they should use in relation to a specific speaking task, how to organize their ideas logically, which is called coherence, how they are going to join their ideas together, which is called cohesion. And then in step 3, this is what Prem was talking about earlier in terms of articulation. The expert speaker actually speaks. They listen to themselves and they correct where necessary. And that's called self-monitor and repair. So it's a physical act, and they try to kind of express their ideas and opinions. And they're using their voice box, tongue, lips, teeth, and jaw to produce these kind of sounds in the articulation phase. And also they're listening to themselves and just trying to correct maybe and repair what they're saying to be more accurate in their message. So in a speaking lesson, the process mentioned above can be replicated to help students improve their speaking lesson. So that's what we're going to look at. How can you, as a teacher online, teach all the same speaking tasks that you have in your course book using a standard kind of speaking procedure? So, in terms of a standard procedure, it's the same as what you covered with the other webinars on receptive skills. There's always some kind of pre-stage. So today we're looking at speaking, so there's a pre-speaking. But if we were looking at writing, there would be a pre-writing stage. If we were looking at reading or listening, there would be a pre-reading or listening stage. So all the skills, receptive or productive, can follow the same procedure. Stage 2 would be the actual speaking task, which is where students just get an opportunity to speak to one another in groups. Stage 3 is the post-speaking stage, where essentially students are getting feedback on what they said in the actual speaking task. So these are the 3 stages that we need to work with if we want to help students speak in the physical classroom and in the virtual classroom. So I'm going to skip through this very quickly just to get through on how to apply what we how to apply the theory to practice. So I'm going to look at the same example that is from the grade 7 textbook in Nepal. Niran is wise, Doma is bold. And I'm going to apply the theory that you've covered with Prem and that I've just gone into a little bit more depth, and how you can apply the pre-speaking, speaking and post-speaking formula. So first of all, we're going to be looking at what the teacher can do in the physical and virtual classroom during pre-speaking. So these are all kind of practical things the teacher can do. So number 1, the teacher shows or sets the speaking task. So here it's the task above. Niran is wise, Dolma is bold, Ritesh is fun-loving. So like I'm doing now, I can share the task with my students in the main room in a virtual learning kind of platform. Then, as a teacher, I should ideally give a short personalized example. So for example, in relation to this speaking task, I can talk about my friends You know, I've got a friend called Raj who's very patient, and you know, he's also you know, he's very organized. So, you know, give some kind of examples, because the problem with a lot of speaking tasks is that teachers expect their students to speak, but they don't give anything of themselves. So if a teacher is willing to share, there's a tendency that students will also share in the speaking stage. Next, the teacher needs to give prompts and ideas for students. So they can't just say, speak about your friends. They need to have clear kind of areas to talk about. So for example, in the task above, which is pretty decent, they got to write the name of 6 friends, not 4 friends, not 3 friends, but 6 friends. And they've also got to use adjectives, which they've probably studied earlier on. So already we've got very clear parameters for a speaking task. So students know what they need to make notes on. And then the teacher needs to really help with grammar, lexis, and pronunciation questions. Because in speaking, the role of a teacher online and in the physical classroom is that you're facilitating the process. And students say, oh, can I say this? Can I say that? Or how do I say this? What's another adjective for this? So this is the role of a teacher in the preparation or the pre-speaking stage of a lesson. If we think about what the teacher's doing, well, what are the students doing in this same stage? So what the students can do in the pre-speaking stage is students make notes individually. So that maybe they decide which 6 friends to talk about, which is your conceptualization. Students can ask the teacher for help with ideas. So they might ask if they can talk about family rather than friends. Maybe they know their family better. Again, the teacher say yes or no, but this is still part of students conceptualizing what they want to say in relation to the task of Niran is wise, Dolma is bold, Ritish is fun-loving. Students can ask the teacher for help with grammar or lexis or pronunciation, which is formulation. So they might have questions like, can I use this particular adjective? Maybe that hasn't been covered in class. So there's a lot that students and teachers are doing in the kind of pre-speaking stage. And this can be done in the main room when using Zoom or on Teams. You can do this in the main room. Because then, and one tip that we recommend is that you could ask students to either turn off their videos and maybe mute, and then they can prepare. And you might give them a time limit to do this. And then they can turn on their video or audio when they have questions to ask you in the main room. And or you can put them into different rooms where they can talk about these different things, and you can go and monitor the different rooms and help them in their preparation. So these are the 2 kind of options you have using virtual learning platforms in the pre-speaking stage. Now, if we go from the pre-speaking, we move to the actual speaking part of the lesson. And here we've got a few other things to consider. So, and it's all about here is articulating and helping students to self-monitor and repair what they say. So what can the teacher do in this stage? Basically, the teacher needs to actively monitor to see the students are talking about their friends and using the adjectives. The teacher makes notes on interesting things that students say to each other about, their friends, using the adjectives. The teacher makes notes on good use of language students are using, and any language errors that affect communication. These errors relate to issues with meaning, use, form, and pronunciation. So here, the teacher is basically listening to the students speaking, really has to monitor. So it's a big part of teaching speaking. You have to be a very good listener as a teacher, both online and in the physical classroom. This is a key one. The teacher limits their involvement in the speaking task. This allows students to speak much more than the teacher and to develop their spoken fluency. And I think a lot of teachers interrupt this flow, whether online or in the physical classroom, but let students talk and let the teacher make notes, is my advice in the actual kind of speaking part of the lesson. What do the students do when we talk about the actual speaking stage? Well, the students in this stage, they can just practice their speaking, and they can do this in breakout rooms. So on online speaking platforms, you have a function usually called breakout rooms. So you can group students in different rooms. So there could be like 3 or 4 or even up to 5 students in each room talking maybe about their friends and using the adjectives. And the teacher's monitoring as they go around. But as Prem said earlier, it's very difficult to monitor. And so you're going to have to, you can't really monitor everyone all the time, but at different points you can. And also, if you want to help with monitoring, my practical tip in monitoring the breakout room where students are kind of talking is give students many opportunities to practice and change the partner. So then you have more time to monitor and make notes for feedback on correction and feedback on interesting things that students have said. Now, in terms of post-speaking, once you've done the kind of pre-speaking, they've done a lot of speaking, you've got to move into kind of the post-speaking stage. And what can teachers and students do in this stage? Well, first of all, the teacher needs to respond naturally in the main room to what students have said in groups or in breakout rooms. An example could be, you could ask follow-up question, oh, has your best friend always been practical? Or you could make comments, oh, Rohan, I heard you say that your best friend is very forgetful. He reminds me of my friend who keeps forgetting birthdays. Or encourage some cross-class interaction in the main room, depending on the platform you're using, by letting students respond to one another. So who else has a friend who is stingy with money, for example? So then the teacher shows the good phrases or sentences and some phrases and sentences used by students in the actual speaking task that can be improved. So this is the error correction part. And this can be done using the virtual board like we're doing now on the PowerPoint. And like you just show and you go, okay, discuss in your groups which sentences are good, which can be improved. And they could do that in breakout rooms, or you could just give them some thinking time in the main room on a virtual learning platform. And this is part of the self-monitor and repair, part of the theory, and it's a good place to kind of finish your lesson. So summary of speaking generally, these are the practical benefits. Hello? Okay, you've got, yeah. Hello? Okay, so you've got many different speaking tasks that you can apply. So for example, you can apply it to projects, role plays, descriptive, personalized speaking tasks, comparative speaking tasks. So you can apply this theory and these practical tips of what the teacher does and what the student does to any of these particular types of speaking activity online and in the physical classroom. I would suggest kind of using this kind of procedure for that effect anytime you're teaching speaking. Also, it develops confidence and fluency because you have planned, supported planning time and many opportunities to practice with many partners. This 3-stage speaking procedure has a sound theoretical foundation built on conceptualization, formulation, articulation with self-monitor and repair. And here, like Prem said, many teachers focus on the product, but with this procedure, you can focus more on the process of teaching. So a lot of you, in terms of practical teaching tasks, you can find a lot of ideas for what to do on these following resources, which are the online resources that we generally use for kind of like teaching ideas. The first one is called is a website by Russell Stannard. And this will be sent with you with a PowerPoint, so you can access the link. And he shows you how to use breakout rooms online, so you can follow the speaking procedure for any type of speaking task that you wish to do with your students. And he also has some really creative ideas on how to use Google Maps and things like that. So I strongly recommend this. One, it's good for learning about a virtual learning platform, but it's packed full of wonderful practical ideas. The other one is ISL Collective. This has a lot of ready-made materials and handouts that you can use online with your students. And online, you can also access things like virtual dice, and you can play with your students, like board games online. And then there's One Stop English, which is quite famous. And they have lots of worksheets, and there's a period where you could access a lot of their material for free. And again, there's lots of activities on all skills, not just speaking. And then All Things Topic is another one that focuses on productive skills like speaking and writing. And you can get lots of nice activities from there that you can do with your students, depending on which language point or which topic that you've covered with them. So, and here are some references if you would like to get into a little bit more of the theory, but I strongly recommend Scott Thornbury's book on how to teach speaking. It's full of practical ideas, and it links the theory very well with the practical ideas. And that's us and our talk about speaking. So if you have any questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you, Prem and Iffy. We've got a couple of questions already. We've taken them down. I think I'm just conscious of the time, so we've kind of coupled some questions together so we can put them in certain themes. There are a couple of questions related to the challenges that we face during, teaching or speaking online, and you did share a couple of them as well during the earlier part of the presentation. So we have Tanka, Santosh, Niranjan, and Jaya all kind of asking how do we cope with all the different challenges, especially related to the technical challenges and English being the second language for Nepali learners. So how do we actually overcome this challenge, these two challenges in particular, while teaching speaking remotely? Any one of you could take it.
I'll take this one. I think one of the biggest challenges for students, I think just in terms of speaking, not just in the physical classroom, but also remotely, is that I think a lot of teachers don't really give any thinking or preparation time. And whether you're working online or in the physical classroom, you need to give quite a bit of time to pre-speaking so that students are more confident when you get into speaking. And in terms of virtual classrooms, as a teacher, you need to be very confident in setting up breakout rooms where you can regroup students so they have the opportunity to speak after pre-speaking. And the website there by Russell Stannard, it talks in detail about how to set up these rooms for different virtual learning platforms. So my advice is generally spend time preparing with your students and get to grips in terms of using the breakout rooms to encourage group work. And then you will find that students, with a combination of those both, will actually speak a lot more, and they can overcome that English as a second language because they've had more time to conceptualize and to formulate with the help of a teacher. I don't know if Prem has anything to add to that, or
Prem, would you have anything to add?
I agree with you, and I would like to add one more thing on that one. Most of the challenges that beyond the technical ones, there are some pedagogical challenges, right? And some of the questions are about why students do not want to speak, why students don't want to take part in the process, right? One of the reasons for that might be our talks are not meeting their interest. Our talks are not meeting their level of motivation and the capacity. So what I would like to suggest here is please try to simplify the talks and think about in which talks your students are more interested in. So that will automatically promote their, let's say, interest, and then they will do the talks as intended. So that will promote. For example, I can give you one example. I have a small kid of 8 years old, and he is doing some online course, right? His teachers asked me, for, draw something that you like the most and make a recording of that and then send to me. So my child drew a very nice picture of a sheep, right? And he recorded that, and he recorded the process, and he posted on the Facebook page. And that was really a nice one, because he never wanted to speak in the class, so he could speak well there, and he had a very good pronunciation. So this is what I think we can do, some individualized talks as well. I think that adds something new on Jamil. I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you. Let's move to the next set of questions, something very similar to what you just spoke about, Prem. Gauri and Yogesh have similar questions. So their question is around motivating learners to actually do speaking activities. So they say that they're happy to read and write, but they find it very difficult to encourage them to speak, and it's very difficult to activate participants to practice their speaking skills. So they would want some tips around that.
Okay.
If you would want to go first.
Sorry?
Would you want to go first?
I can go first. That's not a problem. Yeah, I think in tips, if you want to get students speaking and they don't want to speak, it's a common problem for lots of kind of teachers. What you could do is give them time to script what they want to speak. So you could integrate the writing part of it, yeah? So if they're scripting and you're helping them in the kind of pre-speaking stage, whether it's a role play or something, that might give them the confidence to actually do the speaking, and they can kind of role play with each other. So sometimes if we want to get to speaking, we might need to do a bit of writing beforehand. The other thing is, I wouldn't recommend that students speak in front of the whole class. Group work makes things a lot more anonymous, and it takes the pressure off students, and it also allows them to be more comfortable to make mistakes within a group rather than in front of the whole class. And those are the two things that I would recommend if you want your students to kind of speak a little bit more. Prem?
Yeah, Ify, thank you. In addition to that, agreeing with what Ify said, I would also, let's say, suggest the teachers that they should not make our learners understand that those skills are separate, right? So what I reflect on my learning processes, my teacher used to teach speaking as a separate matter, and reading as a separate matter, and listening as a separate matter. So the students are quite confused that the speaking can be integrated together with reading and writing tasks. For example, if they have written something yesterday, why don't you ask them to say what they wrote yesterday? So that will be a kind of integrative process on building on what they already have. So you can build on the reading and writing tasks, and at the same time ask them to shift to the speaking task. So that will simplify their speaking ability, and then simplify their speaking, the fear, like that will help us to avoid the fear of speaking. So they will be engaged in the speaking activity. I think we can do that one too.
Okay. I think we kind of have time just for 3 more. The next one is around teaching speaking to primary classes. Do we have any tips or activities that the presenters would want to share on how to encourage primary learners to practice speaking in a virtual class?
I mean, yeah, I'll let Prem maybe deal with that one, because he's got quite a young student, he was saying, and then I can chip in for that one after. Yeah.
Actually, there is no particular difference between in teaching the children at primary level and secondary level. The process is the same. The only thing that you can do is simplify the tasks, right? So don't expect that speaking is something that is very much fluent, and speaking is something that is a complete sentence, right? So speaking is something that is also a kind of individual, the pronunciation of individual sounds and putting those sounds together. So you can start with individual sounds and then ask them to put the sounds into sensible words, right? And then you can ask them to listen to the pronunciations from different sources. I think that will simplify how they can get the input. So once they get the input, I think they will be able to produce them out based on the words they have learned before. So we can give some like speaking, like oratory kind of talks, or let's say some quiz and something like that. If
Yeah,
you
I
would
mean,
like to add
yeah,
something?
yeah, I mean, yeah, but I mean, I think you're completely right. I think in terms of also practical activities that you can do, use a lot of visuals. Because I mean, online is great because you can use a lot of visuals. And what Prem said last time about noise, well, on online teaching, it doesn't matter because your principal isn't there. So only you guys hear the noise of the lesson in the virtual kind of world as such. So my advice is use lots of visuals to stimulate conversation. Use a lot of songs as well to get them rhyming and to playing around with things. Also, you can do things like board games. So you can do board games online, which can make it fun because kids love games, but they can also learn through these games. So on the resource list that I've given on ISL Collective, there are a lot of board games there. But also, if you Google digital dice, you can actually, students in breakout rooms can use these dice to play a board game. And it's a lot of fun, and they won't be so shy because to them they're just doing an online game. And what young learners don't love a good game, and then they can practice the language that you've studied. And as Prem said, they probably looked at some of this language before coming to the kind of productive stage, which is the speaking. Those are, so I would strongly recommend looking at the links to ISL Collective for lots of good board games that you can do with kids. Yeah, so that's my answer to that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ifi. So the second last question, it's by Aisha Pradhan Kharga. During the pre-speaking stage, is it advisable to correct the children with corrections related to pronunciation and grammar?
Okay, so I would say a lot of teachers tend to overcorrect. Okay, I think you need some criteria for correction. So generally, as a teacher, one of the criteria that I use is that if there is a breakdown in communication or intelligibility, then I would step in to help in the pre-speaking stage. But generally, in the pre-speaking stage, we're just getting ideas and we're getting, so they can conceptualize ideas, and we might help with language, but I don't think we should correct, because if we correct at that stage too much, in the speaking stage, students are so aware of, I've got to say it right, or correct, that they're not going to be fluent in the speaking stage. And the speaking stage, they should make mistakes. We should encourage that. So my advice is, if you want students to speak, don't overcorrect. I wouldn't do it too much. I wouldn't actually do it really in the pre-speaking. And I wouldn't really step in to do that much in the actual speaking. I would wait till the post-speaking stage. And the only time I would really correct at any stage is if there's a breakdown in communication. Yeah. Yes,
okay,
sorry,
I
Prem?
think okay. I think we have time only for a final one, and I think the theme is quite apt. It's around assessment. So Amzad has asked, could you please help us to understand how to conduct assessment of speaking and listening skills virtually since the assessment of the productive skills?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Do you want to answer that, Prem, or would you like to?
Okay, I can try to answer that query. Okay. Actually, there is no particular difference between the assessment online and assessment in the face-to-face mode. The only thing you have to have is when you give a task, speaking or listening task, you have to have certain criteria for assessment, right? So based on those criteria, but what criteria you design depends on what purpose you had and what level of students you were assessing of, right? So if you are assessing like small children and their pronunciation, you should not be that strict to it, and that you should not be focusing on that much accuracy, because they are doing something and they're producing something. So I would just suggest that any kind of assessment activity, assessment technique, quite be quite useful there. The only thing is you have to develop some criteria based on your purpose. Would you like to add something else?
Yeah, again, yeah, I agree with you because it really depends on the level. I think you've got to be very clear in telling students, if you're assessing their speaking, they need to be very clear on the assessment criteria before you assess. So, I mean, is the assessment criteria based around like the content of their speaking? Is the assessment criteria based around language? And if it is language, what aspects of language? Is it grammar, lexis, pronunciation? And, you know, also maybe is the assessment criteria based around task achievement, or what aspects of pronunciation are you looking at as well? So I think if you want to assess students, the assessment criteria are out there. You need to adapt it to their level and simplify where appropriate. But I think students need to be aware of what the assessment criteria is to make it fair. No.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think we have time only for that, although there were many, but I think we won't have time to take all the questions. Everyone, we will be sending a recording of the webinar tomorrow on your emails. And there will be a lot of links for the links that, of course, presenters have shared today, and also a lot of other links that you can refer to for our previous webinars as well. Thank you so much to both our presenters, Ifi and Prem. I think it was a wonderful session. And apologies, we're a little over time to the participants, but I hope it was informative, and I hope you've got what you came here for, and I hope we've met your expectations. We will look forward to meet you again in the next Friday's session. So thank you so much.